just a second.
I love it. Already questions. Okay.
Okay, we're recording. We are ready, Heather.
Okay, I'm sharing my screen. We'll make sure that I do it right. Are you all seeing Pioneer Library System? Okay, perfect. Thanks, Fern, for shaking your head yes. So I'm Heather Thompson. I work with the Pioneer Library System. If you don't know what that system is, we are a library that covers 3 counties, Cleveland, Pottawatomie, and McLean counties. We also have a reciprocal agreement with Metropolitan Library users where anybody who holds a card with them should be able to get a card with us. And I get to have the fun time of helping Courtney. I get to hang out with you all and learn lots of things about gardening, but also make connections and share the library system. So the neat thing about our library is that we have all of these great resources in this gray strip across the top. But if you've never used our other digital resources, those are available. We have audiobooks and ebooks and videos through a service called Overdrive. Some people may know it also as Libby. That's the more user-friendly version. Then we have digital magazines, which are awesome if you're sitting in the doctor's office and now they don't have magazines that you can read. You can whip out your phone and read it on there. Then Hoopla and Canopy are 2 streaming services that are also available with your library card. And I use both of those for, some of them have books and music, and then I don't have to buy those. So there's movie boxes that are also available. And then our library system down here, just for anybody that's interested in knowing how we are handling our library services now, this is an update of that, and it's also on our library website. But if there's anybody in the audience that either has young people in their life, whether it's from elementary to college level, and they might need homework help, this is available. And the neat thing about that is it's actually tutoring from 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. our time. And it is a program called Brain Fuse. If you need more information, when I'm finished, I'll put my contact email in the chat box. And if you're interested in anything else library, I can even maybe help you with Metropolitan. But we'd love to have you use your library system and take advantage of those things that you pay for with your tax dollars. So thank you.
Thanks, Heather. I really appreciate you always helping me out with webinars and everything. And the library is a great resource. I use Overdrive all the time to listen to audiobooks.
Yay.
Recently started using Canopy, so that's
oh, perfect.
It's cool.
I think I've sent you a request for a video to talk about it if you want to. A video.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It's September, I should say, is Get Your Library Card Month. So I'm going to put myself on mute and kind of watch over your room stuff for you.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Already.
Can you see my screen? Yes. Okay. I apologize. I'm at my office and I haven't done a webinar at my office. I got home and is it the full presentation or is it the half presentation?
I don't know what you mean by half presentation.
Like, is it full screen?
Oh, no. Go ahead. No.
Okay. Let me try this then. Nope, that didn't work. Okay. This always happens and this is why I've been doing it at home.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay.
We'll edit this out of the recording. So it looks like I know what I'm doing.
You do. I have complete faith in you.
Thank you. Okay, how about now? Is it?
Perfect.
Perfect. Okay.
Yay.
Yay.
Okay, I'm going to mute myself.
All right. Thank you, Heather. So like I was saying, I apologize for a couple of technical difficulties. I normally do these from home, and I got home, I finished eating dinner, cleaned up, went into my little office area, and the PowerPoint was not on my flash drive. So I had to race to the office really quickly. So I apologize for a little bit of technical difficulties there in the beginning. But real quick, before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping items. Please keep yourself muted. If you with Zoom and everything, we're kind of sort of getting used to this technological world, but there can always be background noise, and we don't always, can yield that very well. Sometimes it's unexpected. So if you could just please keep yourself muted so we don't have any distractions. Also, please, if you do have questions, type them into the chat. Heather is watching the chat, so we will stop periodically to answer those questions that you have in the chat. And then if you could, and if you haven't already, please fill out the pre-assessment survey. The pre-assessment survey just kind of gives us an idea of your knowledge base at the beginning of the talk, and then we'll have a post-assessment that kind of gives us an idea of how you felt after the talk. So kind of gives us something we can compare and contrast with, and helps us know if we're really hitting on the mark or not with our program. So we will get started. So tonight we are talking about pollinators. I read today that they're predicting that the monarch migration for this year is going to be earlier than normal. So I think they're coming, they're on their ways. But of course we won't talk about just pollinators tonight. We'll kind of go over the broad spectrum. And I know we've got a very wide range of experience levels tonight, so I hope that you get something out of it. If you're experienced and if you're new to this, thank you so much. I'm excited that you're here. So when talking about pollinators, over 90% of all known flowering plants and all fruits and vegetables require pollination to produce crops. And so really our entire existence depends on these little critters and their ability to carry pollen from one plant to another plant. And so as gardeners and as human beings on this earth, we should be concerned about protecting these little guys and making sure that they stick around, maybe selfishly so that we can continue to stick around, but also, because they, are fascinating creatures and are important to very vital to our ecosystem. So who are the pollinators? Bees and wasps, of course, are, we think of bumblebees and honeybees all the time, but wasps are also a valuable pollinator. Moths and butterflies, again, another picturesque, we probably learned that in kindergarten when we learned about the monarch butterfly and hungry caterpillar and how they turn into butterflies. And some of the lesser known, maybe lesser pretty pollinators that we have are flies and beetles. And there are over 100,000 species of invertebrates. And so when I say invertebrates, I mean insects that are pollinators, or insects and arthropods as well. But we also have birds and bats that can exist as pollinators as well. So primarily for birds in our ecosystem are the ruby-throated hummingbird, and bats aren't really as major of a pollinator in our area, but still very valuable to some ecosystems. And of those two, there are over 1,000 species of vertebrates that are pollinators. So lots of different species of pollinators that we have and that we can work to protect through our gardening practices. So we'll go through each of these a little bit more in depth, kind of some fun and interesting things about these guys, and then some plants that they're more attracted to. So starting with the honeybee, it's probably our most iconic pollinator. We think about the bees and save the bees and everything like that. But interesting thing about honeybees is they're actually native to Europe. They are not native to the United States. So they were brought over when the Europeans came over to America, and they brought them over to fertilize their fruit trees. But they do live in colonies. And so that's kind of a unique thing about them, is that they exist in these colonies with different roles and different jobs, and really exist as a system rather than just one bee looking out for itself. They do feed on pollen and nectar to create honey, and we love them for that because honey is super tasty and nutritious. And so, a lot of there are beekeepers that collect bees and harvest those bees for their honey. But, if humans were not involved with it all, in the natural environment, honeybees actually live in hollowed out trees. So, you know, honeybees didn't exist in boxes. We trained them to kind of get used to the boxes and sort of manipulated their environment to be able to exist in those boxes. But if humans weren't around, they would have their colonies in trees, in hollowed out trees. So that's kind of a picture of what that looks like there on the right, of a honeybee colony in a hollowed out tree. But bees are, they are under threat right now, primarily from colony collapse disorder. And there are a lot of theories as to why bees are suffering from this disorder, and some of those include varroa mites. So, and this varroa mites are probably the main cause of colony collapse disorder, and one of the biggest struggles that honeybees have right now. And it's a mite, and they're a parasite. And you can kind of see that. I don't know if you can see my mouse or not, but on that bee's back right there, that is a varroa mite. And so these mites will get into the hives and will get into the cells as the bees are developing, and will latch on to those bees and actually feed on those bees. And so, you know, that is, from really a parasite standpoint, is a very large parasite on a bee. And so you can imagine, you know, just 3 or 4 of those is really going to decline the health of that individual bee. And so varroa mites are a major problem in the honeybee world. But also pesticide exposure. You know, bees don't know, they can't determine, you know, oh, well, that tree's been treated, so I'm not going to go over to that tree. I'm going to go over to this untreated tree. They don't know, they can't tell. And so they'll visit maybe a plant that's been treated by a pesticide that is broad spectrum to insects, and that will kill them. But also decrease of native habitat and inadequate food sources. So with urban sprawl being what it is, and kind of taking out a lot of those pastures that might have native plants in them. And then also the monocultures of agriculture can be, that's taken up quite a bit of space that bees used to have a food source where they could go and forage and feed. And then also stress by transportation from pollination services. So I actually watched a documentary on this on Canopy, which is a free service through the library, but it was a documentary on how bees are transported for their pollination services around the country. So usually early in the spring, the big one is the almond production. And so honeybee keepers will take all their bees to California, and they will exist there and pollinate the almond trees. And then they might move to another state, to New York, to pollinate apples, and continue on moving throughout the country. And you can imagine that, okay, we're here, let's pollinate. Okay, let's get back in the hive. We're going to move to a totally different environment. Let's pollinate here, and then continually moving. That's very stressful for a bee colony. And so kind of using them in that way is very stressful. And all of these, and can contribute to colony collapse disorder. So really sort of, we think a lot of these issues, it's not just one issue, but these issues compiled together have created some problem with the honeybees. But there are native bees. As iconic as the European honeybee is, they are not the only bee. We do have some native bees that exist as pollinators, and they really are probably a more effective pollinator for some of our crops than the honeybee is, depending on what you're growing. But some of those native bees you might encounter are carpenter bees, the American bumblebee, which I saw in the pre-assessment, that's some of your favorite pollinators, and then sweat bees as well, and that's that bottom picture. They're much smaller. But it has been shown, I think, especially in squash type crops, that the native bees are going to be much more effective pollinators than some of the honeybees are. So if you're wanting to select plants for the bees, bees really like flowers that are brightly colored. They also like sweetly aromatic. So, you know, just a nice, good smell, kind of smells sweet to them. They are active during the daytime. So the flowers have to be open during the daytime. And then honeybees also really like landing platforms. So you can kind of think like a daisy like that. That's very easy for a honeybee to land on because they can't eat pollen and nectar while they're flying. And then they also prefer bilaterally symmetrical flowers. But I guess daisies are radially symmetrical, but that's often they prefer that. But interesting thing about bees, which I think is really cool, is that they can see in ultraviolet light, and they can't see red. So red flowers are not really something you would want to have if you were going to want to attract bees, but they can see in ultraviolet light. So that bottom picture there is that on the right is what we see, but on the left is what bees see. And it actually kind of looks like a bullseye. And so the bee knows that's a flower, I can go there. And so flowers have evolved to this to be able to attract bees. So moving on to butterflies, particularly starting with monarchs. Monarchs are also in decline as well, and have their own plight that they are facing. This graph here is a measurement of the hectares in Mexico where the monarch butterflies overwinter. And you can see how that has steadily decreased over time. And I don't have data for 19 through 20 winter, but I looked it up earlier and I believe it was about 2.3. So not quite so, not as good as last year. So it continually trends downward. And so again, as humans and gardeners, I think we need to really develop our landscapes to serve as something for these pollinators. And especially as Oklahomans too, for the monarchs. So you can see here the monarchs migrate every year. So particularly in our part of the country, they go down to Mexico for the winter. So that's where they're headed right now, headed down for warmer temperatures as things start to get cold. And then as things start to get warm, they head up to more the Midwest and the Corn Belt area. So as you can see, we in Oklahoma are right smack dab in the middle of the monarch migration highway. And so it's really kind of an important thing to include pollinator plants and plants for monarchs within our gardens. And especially of those plants is milkweed. So milkweed is the host plant for monarchs. They will only lay their eggs on milkweed, and it is the only plant that the larva will eat. So milkweed is actually poisonous to livestock and a lot of other animals, but the monarchs have adapted to be able to digest that toxicant and are able to become toxic themselves. So it's kind of a symbiotic relationship that way. And so that is the only thing monarchs will eat when they are a larva. So if you want to have monarchs in your garden, you have to have some milkweeds. But the great thing about that is that we have 26 native milkweeds in Oklahoma. So there's quite a few to choose from. Some of the widely distributed milkweeds are here, but especially the ones that you can get in the nurseries that I've seen are the ones on the left. So that green antelope horn milkweed and that butterfly milkweed, those are becoming more readily available in the nurseries as people become more interested and more concerned about the monarch populations. So if you want to select plants for butterflies, butterflies typically enjoy flowers that are in clusters and provide landing platforms. So if you think about any sort of small flower cluster with lots of little flowers within it, that is a butterfly buffet, if you will. So that's kind of really what they prefer. They like brightly colored flowers more in the warm tone range, like red, yellow, and orange. And again, butterflies, like bees, are more active during the day, and so they prefer flowers that are more active or that are open during the day. And so butterflies, they actually secrete a pheromone a scent that attracts the opposite sex when they are looking to mate. And flowers have learned this. Flowers have picked up on this. And so flowers have adapted to create a similar smell to that pheromone. And butterflies think they're going over there to find a mate, and it's a flower instead. And so they're like, okay, well, I guess instead of a mate, I'll just eat some food. And so flowers kind of have evolved to adapt to that. If you are interested in attracting moths to your garden, kind of the difference with that is that you would want a more white type flowers and ones that are open in the late afternoon or night. So moths, they're very closely related to butterflies, but they are nocturnal as opposed to butterflies, which are active during the day. So you would want flowers that are open in the late afternoon or night, and then they don't really pick up on color quite as well, so usually white or dull colored flowers. Flies, another pollinator that we have that I think is kind of underrated and a little bit less talked about. But looking to plant flowers for flies, they're typically pale and dull to dark brown or purple, and they usually don't smell very good. So flies, usually are attracted to dead things, rotting flesh, excrement of some kind. And so flowers have evolved to know this as well. And so when they're looking to get pollinated by flies, they secrete a similar odor. So usually flowers that are pollinated by flies do not smell very good. Though I do really think, and I really wish somebody would create we have butterfly gardens and bee gardens. I really wish somebody would make a fly garden. I think that would be an interesting garden to go see. Not at my house, but somewhere for sure. But also the flowers are usually funnel or complex. And so lots of little flowers within it that they can kind of get into and sort of burrow into. And many of the fly species that are pollinators are bee mimics. And so you might look at it and you might think, hey, I think that's a bee, but really it's actually a fly. And the way you can tell the difference is that flies only have one set of wings. So you can kind of see here in this picture right here, it's only got one wing on either side, but bees have two sets of wings. So that's how you can tell the difference if you're wondering to know if you've got a fly or a bee in your garden. But both are good. And then beetles. Beetles are another insect pollinator that we have. And they usually prefer flowers that are bowl-shaped with the floral sexual organs exposed. So kind of think like a magnolia flower. That's that flower in the bottom. That's kind of a classic beetle pollinated flower. Usually white to dull white or green, kind of like a fruity smell, and then also open during the day. So beetles were one of our earliest pollinators, and magnolias are one of our oldest flowering plants. And so beetles and flowering plants kind of evolved at a similar time period, and usually go for those big sort of almost prehistoric type plants that we still have around. Hummingbirds, if you are wanting to attract hummingbirds to the garden, they kind of have a specific sort of type flower in mind. It's usually tubular with petals that are curved, so kind of almost always trumpet shaped. They really like brightly colored flowers, red, yellow, or orange, and then usually odorless. So these flowers don't usually have a smell. And hummingbirds are like that hyper kid at the birthday party that had too much cake. And it's just running around the house, and you think, oh man, he's gonna pass out soon, but he never does. And so they're always eating sugar and just flying around, and always super happy. But they have to eat lots and lots of sugar to maintain the speed at which they flap their wings. And then bats aren't. Oh, do we have a question?
Yes, and I'm
Okay.
gonna just, I would normally wait a little bit, but there was one specific, the fly was on a purple flower. Do you
Mm-hmm.
know what flower that was?
Oh, gosh, I don't know. I'm not sure what flower that was.
Okay.
I don't. But oh, yeah, I do. I apologize. I'm not positive. I don't remember what flower that was.
Okay. If anybody has, I think there's some kind of app where you can take a picture
Take a picture of that.
and help identify it, but
Yeah.
I don't have one
I
on my
uh
phone.
I apologize. I don't remember exactly what
Heather,
flower that is.
is it a hellebore?
I don't think it's a hellebore.
No.
There was another question too, is why
Uh-huh.
is there a rise of the varroa mites, and is it a pesticide relationship? Question.
Varroa mites were a invasive mite that were also introduced. I believe they were native to Asia. And they're not necessarily, it's not necessarily correlated with pesticides.
Okay.
So the varroa mite was just introduced, and there are not very many, there are not very many things we can do for the bees once they have a varroa mite infestation.
That's too bad. So one of your other Courtneys said that the purple flower is a pawpaw,
It's a
but
pawpaw.
but then someone else wrote Indian banana, Asmenia, Asaminia troloba.
It's
Apparently,
mini
I need to
I
correct
think
this.
I actually found, yep, mm-hmm. Yes, that is right. I found the site where I got the picture from. So thank you,
Is
clone.
it the Indian banana or the pawpaw?
It's a
Or
pawpaw, Asminia triloba.
oh, they're the same thing. Okay. See, I'm
Yes.
gonna learn something new. Yay!
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
Thanks, you guys. Nolita and whoever is being Courtney with the pawpaw comment. I'm gonna
Thanks,
mute
guys.
myself. Real quick, so Nolita used the Planet Net app.
Oh, okay. PlanetNet app. I don't think I've used that one. I use PlantSnap, but it works sometimes. So thank you. I appreciate you guys. Okay, so bats, they're a major pollinator in tropical and desert climates. Not so much really in Oklahoma, but some do migrate into the lower parts of the United States. I guess I have Arizona there twice, but Arizona and New Mexico. And they prefer flowers that open at night. So large in size, pale in color, and are fragrant. So if you kind of think like cactus flowers, and that's what's in that picture there, I believe is a saguaro of some kind. But those are the types of flowers that they pollinate. And so I kind of want to go over this really quick before we go into some management practices, but you'll see sometimes nectar versus pollen. Oh, this is a nectar plant. Oh, this is a pollen plant. And so I kind of sort of wanted to go over the little bit of a difference. So pollen is a protein and it has some fat and nutrients, but it is produced along the anthers of the male part of the flower. And that is what is that is the male part of the flower, and that is what's moved over to the female part of the flower for pollination. But nectar is the sugar with some nutrients, and it usually occurs kind of at the base of the flower. And it, with a little bit of pollen, is the raw material that's used by bees for honey. And so depending on the pollinator, different pollinators use these differently, and sometimes it depends on the time of the year. Some pollinators only drink nectar and sort of inadvertently move pollen for pollinators, but then some actually eat some of the pollen or carry the pollen intentionally. So it just kind of depends on what pollinator you're dealing with. And then I also read this, I thought this was super interesting, but this plant, Oenothera drummondii, or evening primrose, actually can tell when bees are nearby and actually increases its sugar content to be able to attract more insects to it. So if it knows a bee is nearby, it can bump it up its sugar content up for some percentage. And I thought that was fascinating. Okay, so what can we do in our yards to protect and promote pollinators at home? So hopefully you now know why these guys are awesome and super cool and worth protecting and worth caring about. So what do we do? What can we do as gardeners? So first, we can design our garden to be more appropriate for pollinators in the area. And so I really recommend starting with a small area. You know, if we really became passionate about this and wanted to redo the whole entire landscape, that can be very overwhelming and often very costly. And so start with a small area. You know, that a little bit goes a long way, and we got to start somewhere. Also, many landscapes are inherited. So many landscapes, you know, you buy a house, or if you build a house, the developer can only put specific plants in that landscape. And so, you know, we don't oftentimes have this blank palette that we so want as gardeners. So it's a good idea to start building in around the existing area and filling that area with pollinator plants, and doing it in a small, slow way, so that we can kind of sort of convert some of our landscaping into butterfly and pollinator appropriate gardens. And then also have patience. So patience. You know, it takes time for pollinators to know that this is an area where I am safe and I can come eat, and I won't be harmed. So just have patience, start small, and build with what you've got in the area. And also be aware of public safety issues. Just because it's a pollinator garden doesn't mean it has to look wild. You know, so make sure, a lot of times pollinator plants and native plants can get very tall. And so, you know, keeping those back away from the sidewalks. If you've got a right of way, you know, making sure that's cleared. You can make it look really nice. So just because it's a pollinator garden doesn't mean it has to look wild. And managing your plants in a way that kind of sort of keeps them neat is always a good idea for your neighbors, if you want your neighbors to like you. Also, managing your lawn in an appropriate way. So I know lawns are kind of a contentious topic sometimes among gardeners. Some people think we shouldn't have them, but a lot of times we maybe live in a neighborhood where we don't have a choice and we have to have a lawn. So there are some things we can do to help our lawn be a better spot. So if you have any flowering weeds in your lawn, leave them alone. If you have clover or henbit early in the season, just leave them. If your HOA doesn't mind you having a few weeds in your lawn, then just leave them. If you do have to apply any insecticides and you have flowering plants in your lawn, mow very low to below where the flowers are before spraying any insecticides. So if you have to do something like that, make sure that you remove the flowers beforehand. That way the pollinators don't inadvertently come to those plants while there is an insecticide being sprayed. If you can, wait until May or June. A lot of times those early pollinators, as they emerge or as the monarchs begin to migrate, will be visiting those flowering plants within your lawn or within the surrounding area. So wait until a little bit later in the season if you have to apply any pesticides. Also use granule forms of insecticides if you have to. Using any liquid form can potentially drift onto some of your landscaping, and you don't want that, because you don't want to inadvertently affect any of those pollinators. And then also maintain a high mowing height. So maintaining a high mowing height really allows the grass to promote deeper root systems. And so the deeper the root system, the better your lawn is able to prevent any sort of injury from insects that you might have, negative insects that you might have in your lawn. And so it kind of sort of makes the lawn a little bit more resistant, so that you shouldn't have to apply as many insecticides if you have any lawn type insects. So those are just a couple things you can do to your lawn to sort of manage it with pollinators in mind. Don't fear the hungry caterpillars. So if you are growing a butterfly garden and you and something's eating your plants, that's a good thing. That means your plants are part of the ecosystem, and you want that's the goal. It breaks my heart a little bit sometimes when we get calls in the office from people who will say, there's something eating my milkweed. I thought this was a resilient plant. It's doing its job. So don't fear the hungry caterpillars as they munch and go to town on those plants that you planted for them. Also select host plants. So some species of butterflies are adapted to eat specific plants. So if there's a certain type of butterfly that you are interested in having, or maybe you particularly want to attract, make sure to plant those. So for example, swallowtails, they really like plants that are in the Apiaceae family. And so that's going to be things like dill and parsley. And so they really like those types of plants and tend to eat those plants. And then also, I believe it's the Viceroy butterfly. They eat passion flowers. So if those are two maybe butterflies that you want in your area, consider planting those plants. But usually there's some kind of symbiotic relationship between a butterfly and a species of plant. So doing the research to know what kind of plant that you need to plant can be a way to bring butterflies to your area. Also be very judicial with pesticides. So, a lot of times, like we kind of talked about lawns, but, if you're growing a vegetable garden, ideally you want to have vegetables. And so sometimes you have to use some pesticides if there are insects eating your vegetables. So avoid really using any broad spectrum pesticides. So anything like carbaryl, which is 7-dust. Avoid that because that's just going to kill everything. But then also there are some organic pesticides that can kill caterpillars. So BT, which is it's an organic pesticide that is actually a bacteria that makes the caterpillar sick. That's great if you're trying to control worms on maybe your cabbage. But if that accidentally gets onto your butterfly gardens, that will kill your butterflies. So, even if you're an organic gardener, being judicial with your pesticides and making timely applications can be a benefit. And then also, probably, I think this is my last bullet point, but really select plants with food. That's what they're after. They want to eat. So pollen and nectar, that's their pollinators' food source. So select plants that are high producers in pollen and nectar. When selecting plants, native plants are really ideal. And that's because these native plants that are native to our area have evolved over time with the pollinators in our area. And so they go hand in hand, and the pollinators are used to this food source. So growing native plants is going to be the ideal situation. And then also diversity is key. So particularly with perennial type plants that come back every year, they might have a bloom time that varies throughout the season. So some might bloom in early spring, some might bloom in late fall, but you really want to have bloom times throughout the entire season. So you want to be able to provide that pollinator buffet throughout the entire year. So what do I plant? What are some things that I can plant in my garden to bring in those pollinators? So real quick, I kind of want to talk about the problem with wildflower packets or just generic pollinator packets. You might see that sometimes at the box stores or garden centers where it just says bee mix. And so you think, oh, cool, okay, I'll plant this and it'll bring bees. Well, a lot of times those mixes are not region specific. So this is a picture of the, I guess if this was audience, I would ask, oh, doesn't anyone know what this is? But I'll just tell you. So this is the California poppy. It is a wildflower in California. It's gorgeous. It I think last year the bloom was extra spectacular, and there were pictures all over social media. But this is a popular mix in wildflower packets and bee mixes. And so kind of what's the problem with that? Well, where do you think this particular plant is native to? California, right? And so it's not going to grow very well in Oklahoma. You can maybe grow it here with sort of some manipulation, but it's not really adapted to be able to grow here. So the problem with those wildflower packets and those bee mixes is that they're oftentimes not region specific. And so they might contain plants that are totally not adapted to our area and will not do well and will likely disappoint you. But they might also contain some things that do really, really well here, too well, and might act as an invasive species and can take over some areas if introduced. So just be aware of this. And if you do end up with a wildflower packet or maybe a bee mix and you want to plant it, just read what actually is in that mix before planting. And if there's anything that maybe doesn't look quite right, or maybe you're not sure, maybe do some research on that. But I also want to talk a couple places about resources where you can get information on plants. So I'm going to highlight a few plants here in a second, but it's by no means an exhaustive list. So if you're wanting to learn more and wanting to learn more about plants, I encourage you to check out these sites. First is the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation. And so they are a nationwide organization that works on really preserving these pollinators and preserving these invertebrates that are such a valuable part of our ecosystem. And they also have region-specific planting lists. I think their planting list is specific to Oklahoma and Texas. So if you look at that, just kind of be aware of that and see what grows well in our area. Oh yeah, this is what I was talking about. So they have pollinator-friendly plant lists with region-specific. And we are in the Southern Plains region. I love when I put what I meant to in my slides. And then also Okies for monarchs. So this is specific to monarchs, but it is state specific. And they do have regional plant lists within the state that are recommended for monarch conservation. And they are doing a lot of outreach and a lot of programming. And so if you are very passionate about monarchs, I highly recommend being involved or following the Okies for monarchs. And like I said, they also what to plant and where to buy it. So they actually have a list of some nurseries too where you can get pollinator friendly plants. Heather, before I get started on some plants, do we have any questions? Oh, I think you might still be muted.
Whoops, sorry. Thank you.
No worries.
How tall is the grass, or how tall should it be? Or
for the mowing height?
Yes, thank you.
I think they usually recommend 2.5 to 3 inches.
Okay, way longer than I do. Okay.
Was that it?
Mm-hmm. So
Good
far.
deal. Okay. Yeah, so about 2 to 3 inches, 2.5 to 3 inches, that will really help promote a deeper root system and a more resilient lawn. But okay, now we're going to start on some plants for you and some options. Like I said, by no means is this an exhaustive list, but I just kind of want to highlight some plants that might be good additions to your garden. And so we'll start with annual plants. If you aren't familiar, annual plants are plants that complete their life cycle within 1 year. And that might be because that's natural for them. And it might also be because that's what Oklahoma does to them. So we, if we plant them and we have the freeze, they will die. So first is borage. Borage is a delightful little plant. But it typically kind of gets clumped together with old-fashioned cottage styles. It can be a little bit gangly, kind of look a little bit, as a plant, it kind of is a little bit gangly, can be about 2 feet tall. But really the flowers make up for it. So they're these blue star-shaped flowers, and the buds kind of have a nice reddish tint to them, and it's a bee magnet. So bees love borage, and this is a great one to have in your area. And then the cool thing about it is too is, you know, I love a dual plant, is that they have edible leaves. So I believe the leaves kind of taste a little bit like cucumber. So you can add them to your salads if you're interested in that. And then the flowers are also edible. So they're actually quite sweet and can be great additions to desserts and things like that. And that makes sense because if the bees are going after it, it's probably pretty sweet. So a good plant to have if you're interested in it. And a lot of these annual plants that we're going to talk about first, if you're a vegetable gardener, these are good ones to kind of have interspersed around your vegetable garden, to bring some of those beneficial insects and those pollinators into your garden. And so I kind of sort of created this list with that strategy in mind. Cosmos, a very whimsical little flower, comes in sort of pale pinks and magentas and white colored flowers, but has a very airy foliage. It's very easy to start from seed. You can really kind of just throw the seeds out there and they'll do fine. But you can also find transplants in the nursery center, but it does grow quite tall. And it's a lovely plant because the wind will catch on those big blooms and kind of blow. But, you know, we talked a little bit too about that landing area and how plants really prefer that our pollinators really prefer a landing spot, landing pad, so they can have time to drink and eat that nectar. So Cosmos really kind of displays that perfect little landing pad. Dill. Dill is most oftentimes we probably think of it as a culinary herb, something we might add to fish or cucumber salad, but it is a great plant for caterpillars. So caterpillars will eat the foliage as they are going through their life cycle, and it can be an energy source to those caterpillars. So I know sometimes that's not always a good thing, depending on what you're growing the dill for, but definitely a foliage plant if you're looking to feed the caterpillars. It has these sort of umbrella-like flowers as well, and bees are very attracted to those as well. Kind of funny aside, one time our family consumer science educator in the office was canning some carrots, and she asked me to go get some dill from the demo garden that the master gardeners manage, and I said, okay, no problem. So I brought back in, and there were at least 2 or 3 caterpillars in the dill that I brought her back, and she's like, I can't can these. So I took them back outside and put them on what was left of the plant. But my point there is that they, if you plant it, they will come. Lantana. Lantana is another great annual, also has that nice landing pad for the butterflies and the bees. There are types that really kind of have a trailing type, so good for hanging baskets, but also some that have a nice mounding type habit. They come in a variety of colors. I think you can almost maybe get lantana in every color except maybe blue, but very many different colors, and some that even have multicolored blooms. So you can kind of see in that picture there where they have yellow and pink and red blooms all sort of in that same flower cluster. So there are some perennial types of lantana available. I believe there's 2 varieties. I can't name the top of them off the top of my head, I apologize, but there are 2 perennial lantanas available if you're looking for a more perennial type. But this is a great one for butterflies that will actually come in and be able to land on those landing pads. Marigolds, so carnation-like flowers. We all know what marigolds are, right? I hope so. But they are great ones for the bees. Very easy to start from seed. Another one you can just kind of throw out there in your garden. If you do, and this goes, I think I've got this bullet point on a couple different plants, but deadheading encourages blooms. So deadheading, for those of you, for anyone who's not familiar, As that plant grows and that flower starts to decline, going in and actually cutting off those declined flower heads, we call that deadheading. So that will encourage more blooms, which is a great thing if we're trying to attract pollinators to the garden. Marigolds do have some pest issues, so just kind of something to know about that. Spider mites love them. So I wouldn't necessarily plant them too close to any vegetables that spider mites like tomatoes per se, because that's a real good way to just kind of create a spider mite heaven. And they also can get powdery mildew if you have too many planted close together. So diversity is definitely key. So don't plant too many plants so close together, but powdery mildew can be an issue if you've got them in there way too close. Mexican sunflower is another good one that we can plant. It has these big 2.5-inch orange flowers on very thick stems. Kind of has a dark green coarse leaf, but again, really sort of has that landing pad for those plants. It can get very tall, so 3 feet to 6 feet, but this is a really good one to have if you have an area that's maybe kind of dry, really doesn't get a lot of irrigation, and because it does get tall, it will probably go better back in maybe sort of a background plant within your garden.
Courtney?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you talk a little bit more about whether the annual lantanas, can they be overwintered inside?
Yeah, if you had an area that was an area with good light and that was kept warm, so maybe if you had a sunroom or a hobby greenhouse, or maybe I've talked to some people who have garages with windows, those can all be good spots to overwinter. So lantana is actually a tropical plant. So it's one of those plants that's annual because we have a freeze. But if it was in its native environment, it would grow and grow and grow and grow. So if you go down into Florida, they use it as a shrub. It's like how we would use a boxwood here. But so because it is like that, you can overwinter it, but you do have to provide some light to it and kind of a happy environment.
Thank you.
Yeah. Do we have any other questions? Nope. Okay. So nasturtiums, a beautiful little flower with warm colored flowers usually. And my favorite thing about nasturtium is actually the leaves. I think the leaves are gorgeous. They're kind of like little umbrellas where the leaf stem, the petiole, is actually in the center of the leaf and then it goes out. But interesting thing about them is that they also are, the flowers are edible. So like borage, you can put those flowers in your salad to kind of give it some beauty. I believe they have a little bit of a peppery taste, so can kind of add that. And aphids are also very attracted to nasturtiums. So you can use them as what we would kind of call an aphid trap. So if you plant them in part of your garden, the aphids will flock to that spot, and then you can maybe cut that portion off that has the aphids and discard of it. And so that can be kind of a way to manage your vegetable garden. But again, another great plant for pollinators that does really well on the side of maybe a raised bed in your vegetable garden or a hanging basket. Parsley is another host plant for many different caterpillars, so like dill, but it is also a culinary herb, so great to have on top of pasta and things like that. Has kind of a clumping form that you can where the plants sort of go out. And I do have this as an annual plant, but I believe if you have it in a nice protected spot, it can overwinter. So I had one last 4 years one time in a nice protected spot. But bees do also like the flowers. So great for caterpillars and for the bees. And then I think this is my last annual, but zinnias. So zinnias are another one, very easy to start from seed, will reseed, and kind of sort of perennially exist in your garden. They come in a wide range of colors, so pinks and reds and oranges and yellows. There's also some multicolored ones where there's actually maybe some striping depending on the variety, you can get tall type ones that grow very large, 4 or 5 feet or so. And then also some of the more new varieties of zinnias actually have more of a mounding type habit and are good for maybe a container. But these also are another one that might require deadheading or would benefit from deadheading. So as those blooms begin to decline, go ahead and clipping them off so the plant promotes more blooms. Heather, do we have any questions right now? Nope. Okay, I will continue on to perennial plants. So in contrast to annual plants, perennial plants exist. They will go dormant at the end of a season and then come back in the garden. So they will exist. They have a life cycle that lasts over more than 1 year. So starting with the butterfly weed or the milkweed, this is one we've already talked about, but it is an earlier bloomer and the hands down best plant for monarchs if you are planting, if you want them. So it's one that those caterpillars will eat, but butterflies and bees and beetles are all attracted to those blooms as well. It does like a full sun and well-drained soil, so much better for maybe a sandy type soil or an area that doesn't get quite as much water, and does grow to about 1 foot tall. So as we talk about perennial plants, I just want to highlight the time that they bloom. And as we go through them, I believe I have them organized from early bloomer to late bloomer. So that is kind of how we'll go through those. So like we said, diversity is key. So we want to always have that pollinator buffet open. So that, in May, we've got something for them to eat. And in October, we've got something for them to eat. So always having something blooming in the garden. Annuals are a great thing to have because they are typically always blooming. But not a lot of the annuals that I mentioned are actually native type plants. And so these, while only bloom for a short period of time, are maybe a better food source for those pollinators. So like I said, a good diversity, and it's good to have a lot of different things to provide for those insects. Green milkweed is another milkweed or Asclepias. It also blooms early to late summer and is another host plant for monarchs. This one has a little bit higher water requirement than the butterfly weed. So if you have maybe a low area or an area that gets quite a bit more water, this one's not going to be quite as drought tolerant. So the green milkweed would be a good option for that area. Purple coneflower, an iconic pollinator butterfly plant. It blooms late spring to early summer and can grow about 2 to 3 feet tall, depending on the variety or the exact species that you have. It too is a full sun and well-drained soil, so great if you are looking for some drought-tolerant plants. But then also the flowers can attract birds, so they have little seeds in them at the end of the season, and so it's a good idea to leave those flowers out so that the birds can come in and actually eat those little seed heads out of it. So if you like all forms of wildlife, a good one to have as well. Indian blanket or Gaillardia, our state wildflower. It blooms in summer. It can grow to about 1 to 1.5 feet tall. And this one really doesn't like wet feet. And so when I say wet feet, I mean moisture on its roots. So that is something to be very aware of. So if you have it in a spot that gets, quite a bit of moisture or maybe retains some moisture, that's not the plant for this. This is not the plant for that spot. If you have an area that maybe is more sandy, more loose, and really doesn't hold on to moisture very well, this is your plant. So this one too, if you cut it back after blooming, it might have another bloom later in the fall. And so I think I saw that on the pre-assessment. Someone had asked how to keep my garden from looking like a mess by the end of the season. After something has bloomed and after something has been spent, if it doesn't have maybe a obvious benefit like the echinacea or the purple coneflower, that attracts the birds like we just talked about, it can be a good idea to cut it back, and perhaps it will promote a fall bloom. So kind of sort of managing it like that can help prevent that wild end of season wild look. I know exactly what you're talking about. Maximilian sunflower is one that blooms in summer, and it grows very tall. So it can go up to about 10 feet tall. Is a great one for bees and butterflies as well. And this one has about medium water use. And because it is so stinking tall, it would be a great background plant. So put it back there with your tall stuff. If you have it right up in the front, that's going to cause some safety issues. And make it look a little more wild. So kind of stacking your plants to where the tall stuff is in the back, and kind of tapering down to the smaller stuff can sort of help and make it look intentional. And this is also one, if you are landscaping for any wildlife, this plant provides seeds, so for the birds, but also coverage. So I know, if you're looking for like lizards, or maybe if you have quail in your area, it sort of provides a nice coverage and a nice habitat for those ground dwelling wildlife. Blazing star or liatris. This is one that blooms in summer, sends up tall purple spikes. It's a clump forming, so kind of sort of grows up and grows out, and can be divided every few years to maintain the health of it. It does have a very deep root system. It being a native plant actually has one of the deepest root systems, I believe, and that creates that helps it be very drought tolerant. So since the root system is so deep, it's able to dig down and have a very large surface area that it can pull from and pull up that water in times of drought. Whereas other plants that maybe have a more shallow root system have a smaller surface area and can't pull it up quite as well. One thing to note about this plant though too, if you have it in too rich soil, so it's too happy, it's got too much water, or maybe too many nutrients in that soil, those flower stalks can actually flop over. So if you have it kind of in an area that's I wouldn't recommend putting it in an area that's highly maintained, because you may have those flower stalks fall over. And if you're growing, kind of a butterfly garden and your intention is for it to look kind of natural, you don't want to have to stake your plants. So that's just kind of a side note on the blazing star. Aromatic aster. This is one of the later bloomers, so blooms into late summer and into fall. It is much lower growing, so kind of 1 to 2 feet, and it's more bushy type. So it kind of has that mounding habit, maybe sort of good up next to a rock, sort of kind of has that same shape. It's very easily grown in kind of different types of soil, but it must be well drained, and it does prefer full sun. And again, has those really landing pad type flowers that bees and butterflies can really stop on. Showy goldenrod. I really like this one. I think it's my favorite late blooming plant. But it blooms late summer to fall, and has those sprays of yellow flowers, those terminal yellow flower clusters, a great attractant for bees and butterflies. And I failed to mention this on the last slide, but these fall blooming plants, so the aster and the goldenrod, and the next one we'll talk about, those are really important because right now the monarchs are moving south. And so they need to have some sort of fall type food so they can continue. And their buddies who maybe be a little bit late to the game also still have some food so they can make it down to Mexico for the winter. So having, we always think, spring and summer and butterflies, but the fall is an important time to have blooms as well. And goldenrod gets a bad rap. It is wrongly accused of causing hay fever, but that's not, it does not cause hay fever. That is more of a wind pollinated type plant like ragweed, whereas something that's pollinated by insects is not going to get so much quite in the atmosphere. So this one is sometimes wrongly accused of causing hay fever, but that's not true. And then blue sage. So this is another late summer to fall clump forming perennial, has these nice little blue tubular type shaped flowers that are attractive to the pollinators. But I do believe it blooms a little bit earlier, but if you cut it back, it will have that, if you cut it back in late spring, it will promote compactness and you'd end up with less of a wild type plant. So that can kind of help with some of those size issues. So real quick too, I know we just went over some annuals and some perennials, but I wanted to throw in a couple hummingbird plants and plants that are specific to hummingbirds. I got that from Heather. Yeah, hummingbirds. So they're kind of a little bit more unique. Their flower structure is a little bit unique. So I just kind of wanted to talk about some plants for hummingbirds, starting with the scarlet bee balm, which is a bushy perennial. This one really likes more rich, moist soils, and it does benefit from a little bit of afternoon shade. So not your best drought tolerant, dry soil plant, but it is quite pretty maybe in more of a shade type area that's highly managed. It's a good idea to go ahead and deadhead those flowers. Again, that will increase blooms throughout the season. And you would want to divide clumps every 3 to 4 years to be able to maintain the health and vitality of that plant. Crossvine is another one. It's a semi-evergreen woody vine. It is related to creeper and sometimes get confused for trumpet creeper, but trumpet creeper is a lot more aggressive. It's kind of a very aggressive vine that can take over some of your plants, but crossvine it's a little bit more relaxed, but it looks very similar. Very striking blooms where they're orange on the outside and yellow on the inside, and it is a native to our area. So a good one to have for those hummingbirds. And again, thinking trumpet shaped flowers because they've got that really long snout that goes into those plants. Cypress vine is another one. This is a herbaceous annual vine. Sometimes it does reseed, but it's usually one you can find it as a seed packet in the garden centers, and you would start it from seed. It's a very vigorous climber, can be a little bit on the aggressive side, but you do need to give it a trellis and give it something to climb onto, because if you sort of use it as a ground cover, it will likely go everywhere. So a good one to have up on a trellis. This one does like well-drained soil and full sun. And if you do start it from seed, it's a good idea to scarification. So scarify those seeds. And so that's where you would get maybe like a sandpaper and actually rub those seeds down a little bit to break down that seed coat. And that makes seed germination just a little bit easier and a little bit more guaranteed for that plant. And then last but not least is hummingbird plant. This is one, it's kind of a shrubby type plant with a fuzzy gray-green color. And again, those red tubular shaped flowers. We actually have one outside of our classroom at the extension office. And we've been having Master Gardener classes on Friday, and from where I sit while we're having classes, I can see this plant outside the window and there's always a hummingbird on it. So this is a great one for hummingbirds. And it is drought tolerant once it's established. So once you, plant it in the ground and it gets established and those roots are nice and deep, it doesn't need very much water, and can be an easier plant to take care of. So if you, that kind of wraps it up for this evening. So if you are interested in any more information on some of these, I encourage you to check these sites out. So our fact sheet page at OSU has recently been revamped, and you can go in there and you can search for any topic that you're interested in. So if you want to go in there and type bees or butterflies, it'll pull it up. And then also, this is my shameless plug for myself, our social media pages. Facebook and Instagram, we'll post about garden tips for what's going on that particular time of year, maybe what you should do. If we start to see anything in the office that come in regularly, we'll post about that. And then we also post about upcoming events as well. So thank you all for spending your evening with me. I appreciate it. I hope you're inspired to, to protect your pollinators and landscape for them. And I will take any questions you have.
Courtney, are you going to have classes? You said you're looking to have some more in October, November, and December, just different topics?
Yes. You know, in the world of COVID, we switched to webinars. And then Heather started helping me out, and we were having a lot of fun. And so we've been doing them pretty regularly. I think we're going to plan on right now maybe one per month until the end of the year, and then pick it up in January, because that's really when people start to think about gardening. Is really almost the first of the year is when they start to think. And so we'll probably do maybe 2 a month after the first of the year, but we will continue to have webinars. I have a newsletter, and when I send out the post assessment, I will send out a sign up sheet for our newsletter. And so that's somewhere where we'll post about webinars and events coming up, and then also our social media pages.
All right, you might check your chat. You've got quite a bit of, well, the last 5 minutes.
Questions?
Starting with Scott Harvey. This was great.
Scott Harvey, okay.
And you got a question. Does neem oil? See that one?
Neem oil. Okay, I see the neem oil question.
Yeah, and then go down.
Neem oil is usually going to be is more going to be to treat insects, and usually soft-bodied insects. So it's an oil, and you it actually suffocates those insects out. So thinking like aphids, it's a great thing to treat for aphids, because it will actually suffocate those little guys and kill them, essentially. It's not so effective on hard-bodied insects. So anything, you know, like squash bugs or anything like that, that's kind of sort of, I think, like crunchy. It's not as effective because that oil doesn't penetrate quite as well. So soft-bodied insects like aphids, scale as well, neem oil will treat. But when it comes to powdery mildew, one of the better things you can do from a management standpoint is thin. So usually powdery mildew likes a lot of humidity and moisture necessarily, really more humidity. And so if you go in and you thin that canopy of that plant so that there's more airflow, then it's going to decrease the humidity within that microclimate and help decrease the spread of powdery mildew. So that, from a non-pesticide perspective, is one of the things you can do. I hope I answered your question, Courtney. Pat, I see you said, do any pollinators use lilies and iris? You know, I know lilies produce quite a bit of pollen. You see it. Lilies, I think you have to get kind of deeper into those folds of those flowers. And so I haven't seen them on any lists, but I would think, you know, bees might use lilies since they have such exposed pollen. But I don't know if they're really a favorite. Nolita said she was chopping down her trumpet vine and just found out it's crossvine. Good deal. Okay. Glad to hear it. Terry says you may never get us in a classroom again. That's not true, Terry. We're going to get you in a classroom eventually. Someday. But I am the webinars are fun, and I appreciate everybody being open to them. I know sometimes it's more fun to be in a classroom and to talk and to see you guys. So I appreciate everybody getting on Zoom and listening to me talk. Any other questions? I didn't miss any, did I?
I don't think so.
Good deal. Okay. Well, we don't have anything scheduled for October yet, but watch our social media pages and the newsletter. And if you have any suggestions, I'm always open to suggestions. So something that's nice in fall, maybe pansies and mums and bulbs or something we can do. But thank you, everybody. I appreciate you.
Courtney, I'm going to stop recording.
Okay.